I paid for my sister's wedding venue as a present, and now my other sister, who can be incredibly entitled, is demanding I repeat that gesture for her. On top of everything, our parents have decided to label me as self-centered and uncooperative because I'm refusing. I'm a 32-year-old woman with two younger sisters, Michelle, 30, and Denise, 27. Unfortunately, Denise and I have never had the closest relationship, and we stopped speaking altogether for a couple of years following a tense confrontation during a Christmas party that I hosted 3 years ago. Back then, my mother was feeling unwell, so she asked me to host the family for Christmas. Being my first time putting together such a big gathering, I was determined to make it extraordinary. My husband and I spent days making sure every element was perfect, coordinating decorations, planning the menu, even rearranging our living room furniture to accommodate everyone comfortably. All that effort was paying off, as the relatives seemed happy when they arrived, and many of them even complimented our hard work. But Denise found a way to poke fun at every choice we made. She kept throwing out snide comments and making unpleasant jokes, nitpicking the decorations, the music, the food, basically everything. I don't recall her exact remarks, but I do remember my mounting annoyance. Eventually, I reached a breaking point and told her to either keep quiet or leave if she disliked our efforts so much. That escalated quickly. We got into a heated argument, and she stormed out in a huff. In the aftermath, Denise and I stopped talking. We'd sometimes run into each other at other family gatherings, but she would ignore me, and I would pretend she didn't exist. Our parents tried to patch things up several times over the years, but they rarely expected her to apologize. Instead, they insisted I be the bigger person because I was older. Their logic was that I ought to show maturity and overlook petty disagreements. However, Michelle sided with me, pointing out that Denise's behavior at the party had been shameful, and that anyone in my position would have reached a similar boiling point. Deep down, Michelle and I both understood that Denise was beyond spoiled, and our parents had facilitated her bad behavior since childhood. They favored her as the youngest and rarely disciplined her, even when she was blatantly rude or disrespectful in public. Meanwhile, Michelle and I had been raised differently. We learned to be well-behaved, faced consequences for our mistakes, and generally understood boundaries. Denise got a pass on everything. It was almost like she had been raised by completely different parents, ones who allowed her to get away with acting out at any time. Our attempts to include her and befriend her never went anywhere because Denise was both stubborn and ill-mannered, and she had no interest in changing. The rest of the world was nowhere near as indulgent as our parents, so once Denise became an adult, she found herself in constant trouble. Over the years, she got fired from multiple positions because of her sour attitude, offending colleagues and sometimes even clients. Her reputation took a serious hit, and she hardly maintained any friendships. She was perpetually hostile and believed she was above everyone else. Michelle and I finally cut ties with her, too, realizing she was unlikely to change. We were all too old to keep pretending her behavior was acceptable. Our parents saw things differently, though, insisting we give her endless second chances, just so the family seemed united. Last year, Michelle got married to her long-term boyfriend Andy. They had been dating for several years, and I knew Andy well. He and I clicked from the start, because we share similar personalities, enjoy the same kinds of activities, and have a sense of humor that really meshes. Michelle and my husband used to tease that Andy and I were more like siblings than Michelle and me. So, when Andy finally popped the question, I decided to pay for their wedding venue as my special gift. It was meant to be a private arrangement, but my mother found out while helping Michelle plan. Michelle had inadvertently mentioned something about the venue expenses, and Mom put 2 and 2 together. At the time, nobody seemed to have a problem with it, but fast forward to today, and it's a whole different story. Denise recently got engaged, and she now wants me to pay for her wedding venue, too. At first, Denise reached out to me a few months back, shortly after her engagement, claiming she wanted to bury the hatchet. She apologized for her terrible behavior, not just from the Christmas fiasco, but from all the other times she had undermined or insulted me. She said she wanted us to start fresh, especially now that she was getting married. I saw it as a sincere peace offering, and because she's my sister, I decided to forgive her and attempt to build a healthier relationship. It seemed genuine, and after years of silence, I hoped we could at least become cordial again. She told me all about her fiancé, Hank, whom she met through a dating app. She said they hit it off so profoundly that they moved in together within a month and decided to get married after a year. I personally felt they were moving a bit fast, but I kept that to myself, as it wasn't my place to interfere with her decisions. Michelle and Denise, on the other hand, had already reconciled around the time of Michelle's wedding. This was mostly because our parents had emotionally manipulated Michelle into inviting Denise so the family could keep up appearances. Michelle is far kinder and more soft-hearted than me, so she relented and sent Denise an invitation, but she made sure to discuss it with me first. I encouraged her to go ahead and invite Denise, since their rift mainly existed on my account, and I didn't want to create any new problems. I wanted Michelle's wedding to be about her happiness, not about old grudges, so I assured her I had no objections and even encouraged her to make that grand gesture. Denise did come to the wedding and managed to keep a low profile. She didn't cause drama or any awkward scenes that day. She stayed mostly quiet, left rather early, and tried to be polite. That made me think she might have matured during our years of silence. Because of that, when she reached out to me at the beginning of this year, I decided to be open-minded and not cling to our previous conflicts. We stayed in light contact for a couple of months, and I found myself believing she had indeed changed for the better. She spoke about how she was deeply in love with Hank, how they were absolutely sure of one another, and how thrilled they were to start their lives as husband and wife. But then, only a few weeks ago, she broached the subject of me paying for her wedding venue, exactly like I had done for Michelle. Obviously, there was no mystery as to how I felt about it. I turned her down immediately, explaining that the circumstances were completely different. I couldn't justify shelling out that kind of money for Denise, especially given our rocky history. She didn't push back in the moment, she just abruptly ended the call. That should have been my first clue something was brewing. Sure enough, within an hour, my parents were on the phone with me, absolutely furious. They roared at me for saying no to Denise, because apparently she had called them in tears, lamenting that her entire wedding budget was in disarray now that I wouldn't be covering the venue costs. She accused me of unfair treatment, and claimed I had always favored Michelle anyway. Of course, I do have a preference for Michelle, simply because she's treated me with real kindness all these years, whereas Denise has consistently tried to insult or belittle both of us. She had even insulted me repeatedly at that Christmas party, and that was merely one instance of her many acts of rudeness. Usually, I ignored her jabs to avoid the drama she so enjoyed. That one Christmas night was the single time I stood up for myself, and it resulted in years of silence between us. So yes, I admit I favor the sister who has never tried to humiliate me. I refused to feel guilty about that and told my parents they could not shame me into forking over money for Denise's wedding. I reminded them that, unlike Denise and Hank, I'd known Andy for ages and considered him a friend, making my gift to Michelle all the more meaningful. With Denise and Hank, I barely know the guy, I've only interacted with him briefly, and the bond isn't there. So no, I don't think I should feel obligated to pay for their venue. Instead, I'm perfectly willing to pick a gift off their registry, like any normal guest, but that's all I'm inclined to do. My parents didn't accept that explanation, and accused me of choosing favorites. They implied I was damaging family harmony by denying Denise financial help, and they insisted that if I really cared about our family, I would avoid stirring up more trouble. They even brought up how they forced Michelle to invite Denise to her wedding so that we would seem like a big happy family to everyone on the guest list. It became painfully obvious that they cared more about presenting a facade of familial unity than actually addressing the real problem, Denise's behavior. Their determination to keep this charade going only made me dig my heels in further. I told them I refused to fund Denise's wedding venue, no matter how they tried to strong-arm me. My mother nearly broke down in tears, and my father called me unbelievably selfish and entitled. I couldn't help but feel ironic amusement. How was I the entitled one, when Denise was literally demanding I hand over thousands of dollars for her big day, just because I had done it for Michelle? When I asked my father to elaborate on why they saw me as entitled, he claimed it was all about me, refusing to be part of the family, and not stepping up for my younger sister. That argument was thin, and I think they realized it. I told them they could cut me out of their lives if that was truly what they wanted, because there was zero chance I'd back down and pay for a wedding venue just to appease them. And if they were so devoted to enabling Denise that they'd disown me over it, then so be it. They ended that call with a barrage of curses, saying they never wanted to speak to me again. I almost hoped they would follow through, so we could skip the constant drama. But sure enough, they phoned again the next day, informing me they had made their decision. They were disowning me for not acting in the family's best interests, which was basically another way of calling me selfish. I'm fairly certain they believed this threat would scare me into submission, but I was beyond caring. I pointedly said they could proceed however they liked and even volunteered to block them myself to save them the trouble. They angrily labeled me a brat and predicted I'd regret my actions in the future, when I had no family. I ignored their rants, mostly because I felt drained by the endless theatrics. I assured them no amount of threats or verbal abuse would change my stance. I wasn't about to burn through my savings on Denise's wedding. All they were doing was making themselves look even more unreasonable. They finally stopped calling, but then Denise replaced them, bombarding me with calls and messages. She claimed I was treating her with cruelty, and insisted I was obligated to do for her what I had done for Michelle. She even tried to paint herself as the victim, going on about how Michelle and I had allegedly excluded her from our little private club growing up, and that this was the true reason she lashed out all those years. That was ridiculous, given how many times Michelle and I had attempted to include her in our activities, only for Denise to act like she was too good for us. I told her I wasn't going to let her rewrite history, and if she refused to accept the reality of her own actions, that wasn't my problem. I blocked her number, but she found other phone lines to contact me. She called from Hank's phone, from her friends' phones, numbers I didn't recognize, so I had no chance to avoid them. Each time, she spewed the same manipulative arguments, complaining about how I was crushing her happiness. Finally, a few days ago, I reached my limit. In our final conversation, she repeated that I was injuring her emotions and that I owed her this grand gesture, simply because I did it for Michelle. I snapped, telling her outright that I didn't owe her a thing, that our bond was nothing like what I had with Michelle, and that she had never bothered to treat me with genuine respect or affection. Therefore, I had no interest in spending thousands for her. Had she ever truly tried to be a decent sibling, I would have happily offered the same gift without even being asked. But her sense of entitlement throughout this entire fiasco was off the charts. She could have backed off, but of course she didn't. She proceeded to accuse me of being envious of her, implying that I couldn't stand the possibility of her having a remarkable wedding, attracting all the spotlight, and hearing relatives praise her event above anything else. She said I was terrified that she would win by hosting a more glamorous wedding than Michelle's. Her delusions were laughable, and I made that clear. I fired back that maybe I simply didn't like her attitude and certainly didn't want to throw my hard-earned money into a marriage I suspected wouldn't last. I mentioned that her temperament and tendency to antagonize people might scare Hank off in the long run, and it was pointless to finance a fleeting union. That remark sent her into a full-blown screaming fit, and I hung up the phone. Naturally, my parents and a handful of relatives contacted me afterward, scolding me for hurting Denise by hinting that Hank might leave her. They considered it crossing a line. They insisted she's now completely distraught, and they blamed me for being cruel. I might have felt bad about that if Denise hadn't also hurled nasty accusations my way. In truth, many others told me I hadn't really overstepped. She prodded and prodded until I snapped, and it's not like I threatened her. I simply pointed out a possibility that any sensible person could see. Even my husband, Michelle, and her husband Andy agreed that I was merely standing up for myself. There was no reason for me to apologize. I did think my parents would show at least a hint of fairness, but clearly that was too much to expect. Things escalated further. My parents kept pressuring me to apologize, wailing that Denise was heartbroken over my words and that I should take it back. I honestly can't imagine why she's so distraught unless she truly doubts her relationship with Hank. If she felt secure, my opinion would be irrelevant, right? I suspect I hit a raw nerve because, perhaps deep down, she knows her track record. She's gotten so worked up that I think she's either worried about losing Hank, or just reveling in the attention our parents are giving her. Either way, I have no intention of apologizing, because I don't believe I was wrong. She is still going ahead with her wedding, so my refusal to pay doesn't change that fundamental fact. It's beyond me why she insists on involving my parents and creating a frenzy. I was initially very upset by how my family was treating me over this refusal, but now it's crystal clear they place Denise on a pedestal, no matter how old she gets or how obnoxious her behavior. My parents have always pampered her, and they're not about to stop. At this rate, Denise will never learn to behave decently, because they shield her from any consequences. That's their problem, not mine. I just feel sorry for anyone who tries to befriend her, not knowing the drama they are about to walk into. Then came yet another update. Denise sent out her wedding invitations recently, and as expected, I did not get one. Neither did Michelle. I can't say it was shocking for me, but Michelle, who had extended a wedding invitation to Denise last year, was completely baffled. When Michelle originally hesitated to invite Denise to her own wedding, our parents twisted her arm until she caved. Yet this time, our parents don't care that Denise has excluded both of us. They don't mind that she's shutting out Michelle, even though Michelle tried to be cordial at her own wedding. The double standard is infuriating. What really stings is that they went further by texting Michelle privately, claiming she could still snag an invitation if she promised to cut me off and refused to speak to me until I apologized. Michelle, of course, refused to play along. She lashed out at them, calling them the worst parents ever, which caused them to react with more verbal abuse. They even declared they only have one daughter left now, Denise, because Michelle and I are allegedly selfish and unwilling to make any sacrifices for the family. It's appalling to see how deeply entrenched they are in their own warped logic, thinking that unless we submit to Denise's demands, we're not real members of the family. They somehow view complete submission to her every whim as proof of loyalty, no matter how disrespectful or ungrateful she's been. Michelle and I find it extremely hypocritical, because we've given Denise endless opportunities to show some decency. Time and again, she's refused. She's lied, manipulated, and belittled us. And each time, our parents turned a blind eye and insisted we try harder to get along with her for the sake of family unity. But if you ask me, it's not our job to cater to someone who is perpetually rude and juvenile. If anyone is to blame for Denise's inability to keep a job or maintain friendships, it's our parents, because they made sure she never faced discipline or learned empathy. She might have turned out differently if they'd taken responsibility at some point, but that ship sailed long ago, and they're still enabling her outbursts. It's depressing and exhausting in equal measure. The final update is that Denise and Hank have officially tied the knot. They got married a few days ago in our parents' backyard. I saw pictures splashed all over social media, so it clearly happened. All that fuss about wanting a paid venue turned into a backyard celebration that looked perfectly fine. People seemed to have a good time, so the earlier tantrums feel pointless and overblown. They could have planned it that way from the beginning instead of harassing me. Regardless, I stayed home, as I wasn't invited and had no wish to show up unannounced. After the wedding, numerous relatives contacted me asking if it was true I had promised to cover the venue but backed out at the last minute. Apparently, that's the story Denise told them. She claimed I caused them so much trouble that they had to improvise with a backyard wedding and remove me from the guest list. Of course, I explained my side, and most of the family believed me, because they are aware of Denise's track record. She and my parents made themselves look silly by concocting a fib no one would swallow. I haven't communicated with my parents, or Denise at all since that last heated argument, and I don't see any possible reconciliation on the horizon. Michelle and I agree we're done allowing them to disrespect us, or guilt trip us. Now that both of us are out of our parents' orbit, they can't use emotional blackmail to force us to forgive Denise. We're both happier maintaining our distance. There's a bit of sadness attached to letting go of the good memories. Sure, our parents did have warm moments with us in the past. But those pale in comparison to the recent turmoil. Deep down, I know I made the right decision by cutting them off before they could drag me into more chaos. On the day I saw the wedding photos, I felt a pang of nostalgia, but then I realized I was never truly wanted among those people unless I brought my checkbook. It's better to be free of that environment. I plan to live my life unbothered by their judgment, and I'm not looking back.